comment quickly on the entrepreneurial gene. I do believe there are humans that have that fifth gear, that entrepreneurial gear. But I also want to make the case that we are doing everything in our power at Arizona State to imbue the entrepreneurial mindset for every single human being that comes into our classrooms and into our spaces. And I think the programs that you're supporting are the kind of the sizzle for a lot of folks to say, oh, maybe I do have the gene or the wantingness to create this impact, but at the end of the day, it's the hard work. And what we're teaching at ASU is the methodology. So if you have the willingness to put the work in to create value vis-a-vis a new product, a new service, a new company, we're going to give you the methodology to increase the efficiency of all that hard work. And then, there's luck, there's timing, there's all sorts of other factors. But you're right. I mean, we have to not only support those people that have that ability to get into that fifth gear, but also the students who may kind of get this methodology and this entrepreneurial mindset to click in when they're in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, like Colonel Sanders in their 90s. Yeah. So really there's no time limit on the impact of your willingness to support them at this stage of their career at Arizona State. So
and I think I would say most of those people that you're talking about that you try to support and bring in, I'd say if not all of them, most of them have the gene. It's just in varying degrees.
You're right.
And they may not be able to identify it, but once they're around other entrepreneurs and they get all excited and it starts to manifest itself, and then it takes an act of courage at some point. Because the biggest thing is, taking that step and saying I'm all in and I'm going to launch this company hell or high water. I'm going to give up my job, whatever. And that's a big act of courage, and most of the time that doesn't happen unless they're around other entrepreneurs. Yeah. And so that's a big thing of some of the things that you do and that we support. It's providing that kind of backstop to other entrepreneurs.
That's a great segue, I think, into you mentioned your son Nick Hool. So after we spent a lot of time together doing the Edson Student Entrepreneur Initiative, morphing into the Edson Demo Day, morphing into the ACVC, and then kind of being the catalyst for what turned out to be the ASUIO. And we got to thank our colleague, Dr. Cody Friesen, one of our faculty entrepreneurs, for spearheading that. But around that same time, as the transition was happening between ACVC and ASUIO, I had the opportunity to come and teach within the IRA Fulton Schools of Engineering specifically. And I was also given the opportunity to relaunch a lot of the entrepreneurial efforts that you were involved with in your early days of entrepreneurship at ASU. Some very forward-looking folks were in the schools of engineering, and we were challenged at that time, circa 2015, to create, at the time, what we called the Startup Center at the IRA Fulton Schools of Engineering. And so that has since morphed into entrepreneurship and innovation at the Fulton Schools. So I was honored to become the director of the Startup Center, director of E&I. And I'll remember early in my tenure, I had the opportunity to meet your son. And it was kind of happenstance. I knew you, but I didn't know Nick. And Nick was, I think, as you're describing, our first meeting, he was wearing this it reminded me of Ghostbusters. It was almost like a colander, that you would shake your lettuce out, and it went over your head and it had all these, nodes and breadboards attached to it. And he said, "Hey, I knew he had developed a couple of apps prior to this, but he said, hey, check out this cool technology that I'm working on in the biomedical engineering lab." And I'm thinking to myself, who is this kid? He's he's definitely some sort of hacker. Yeah. But during that first meeting, he did not really it wasn't palpable that he was on an entrepreneurial track. Mm-hmm. It seemed like he was a tinkerer, a maker, a hacker. But it was clear during that first meeting that he was interested in potentially commercializing his invention, but he didn't have a path forward with that. Yeah. So that was exciting to kind of do. What were your recollections of Nick?
Well, getting back to my theory that I think is beyond a theory. that you have the gene or you don't. So I think like Nick had the gene. He's a good example. Could be any entrepreneur. It was just dormant, and like he didn't realize it. But like, when in my case, I spend a lot of meetings over the years in Starbucks, different coffee shops, talking to entrepreneurs, right? So we'd have these coffee shop meetings, and once in a while I'd have to drag one of my kids along. Most of the time it was Nick, and he'd sit over there when he was a little kid, and we'd do our stuff talking, and then we'd leave. 2 or 3 years into this, he started asking me questions about the startups on the way home. He said, "Dad, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that?" It's like, wow, he's got it. He's got the gene in him. So I tried to support that, but it's all Nick. He's just an example, right? So Nick was he got his PhD, smart kid, neurostimulation. Worked with Jamie Tyler here, and but came up with a product, and now he's launched a company. So it's really exciting to see that from that such a close perspective.
Yeah,
and I'm glad you played a role.
Oh my gosh, I'm so proud to have met him at that early stage, and so he was one of our shining stars. And the other thing, Michael, you've been a huge proponent of is helping students connect to co-founders and also faculty to connect with co-founders, graduate level or professional folks, because early on, like circa the time we first met, the going concern was it's all about team, right? It's all about execution. It's all about hard work. So one of the things you've been very vocal about is how do we create programs, environments, opportunities to bring people together that either have the gene or are curious or are entrepreneurially minded to connect and rally around a problem statement. And that's what I saw Nick do. It wasn't until he recruited a couple of co-founders from his ecosystem of friends and classmates, and they created a really strong team, a really cool product based around vagus nerve stimulation. And what his son did, and I can tell you this because I was right there watching the whole thing from front row, was he went on and they won our very first grand prize representative ASU, a pure venture team, $100,000 out the door. So thanks to Avnet, one of our corporate partners here in the Valley of the Sun, wrote a check for $100K, no questions asked, to Nick. And I remember it was funny, you bowed out of the judging process that year as a sponsor,
right?
Just to make it clear that Nick and his co-founders, Sammy and John, I believe, were in the vanguard. And so we're very proud. And like you said, they were going head to head with MIT students, Stanford students. Cal,
it was cool.
Penn.
It was cool to see. It was the first time that that we actually had head to head with some prestigious schools and their entrepreneurs, that they flew out here and they competed on our home turf, and we actually won. So
we won, and I guess it was your prodigy that helped us bring home the big prize that particular year. But you also mentioned at about that same time, we were widening the net in terms of how can we support more entrepreneurially curious, entrepreneurially minded, dormant entrepreneurs in our ASU ecosystem. And you mentioned a program that we launched with the support of our current VP and Executive Director of the Orrin J. Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute, my friend and colleague Jimmy Choi. We were able to launch this program called Venture Devils. And it included the funding we had from the Edson program, but then it also expanded the reach of the program vis-a-vis prize money that your firm put up on an annual basis. So, we could go down year by year and identify groups of student founders just like Nick and just like Keith that Michael and his firm have supported. And like you said earlier, your kind of unique value proposition within that framework of giving. So we had Edson that would catch about anybody. We had other donors and sponsors that focused on social impact. We have other donors and sponsors that focused on sport and retail, and the list goes on and on. But you said, hey, I want to look at the technical founders that are coming out of the graduate programs, out of the undergraduate programs. And it's been a few years of being an integrated sponsor track within the Venture Devils program at ASU, which supports basically anybody with a pulse. If you want to be an entrepreneur, that's the program for you. And without Michael, kind of coming in the early days and challenging us to put our entrepreneurs up in a demo day scenario, we still run demo days twice a year.
Yeah.
Jimmy and her team, Tracy Lee, you've been a part of this from day one. So
yeah, and I think that those type of competitions are hugely important because they're the best proxy for real life that these entrepreneurs are going to face. Yeah. And one of the things that that I think we add value and I can bring to the table and I try to focus on is when most of these entrepreneurs are fairly new, right, to the idea of starting a company. So and they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. So with our experience, we know what they don't know, and it's just we can kind of layer along on top of what they know and say, look, these are some things you ought to consider. These are some things you're going to face. But one of the things is that you mentioned is it's really important to have other collaborators that can kind of give you strength where you have weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to start a company, and it's super difficult to do it all by yourself. Mm-hmm. Very, very unlikely. So one of the things that we try to encourage is stimulating interaction between different types of people that can be supportive, of each other. And then also, having an eye towards this is how an investor will look at your company. Because a lot of entrepreneurs that we have worked with over the years, especially coming out of the school, it could be a great idea and they get a lot of good mentoring and stuff, but they don't necessarily have the perspective of how an investor would look at them. And so we can bring that to the table because those are the transactions we do day in and day out. And like I said earlier, it's our privilege really if we can help someone get into a position where they would be attractive to investors, we want to connect them to those investors. So we spend a lot of time, and over the years, this trip we were talking about was kind of tied in with some of our efforts to try to draw interest from venture capitalists from Silicon Valley into the things we're doing here and give them exposure because there's a lot of great things here. It's not just flyover country.
That's right.
It is flyover country, but it's a great country to fly over.
It is. It's
but you ought to land once in a while, put some money in.